The Milwaukee Bucks still have some uncertainty with their roster this offseason, as key star Giannis Antetokounmpo hasn't made up his mind this offseason as of recording on what he plans to decide to do this offseason. It's left the Bucks in a question of what path do they really decide to go to. With the team being in the second apron and having a franchise player in Giannis, you obviously want to keep and build around him and make him your pillar stone and your cornerstone, obviously to try to get another championship. But with having no future first round capital, having Damian Lillard be out for what it seems like to be the whole season with a torn Achilles going into next year, it is going to be very difficult for Milwaukee to really do that. So today's offseason breakdown, we're going to look at the Milwaukee Bucks and ultimately decide what I think they will do this offseason, going over their trades, potential signings, and then looking at the draft. If you guys are a Bucks fan, let me know your thoughts down below in the comment section if I did the Bucks justice or if I tore them apart. And if you do enjoy this content and want to check out the other videos on the channel, diving in and looking at every other team's offseason breakdown, definitely go take a look at those as they're all in the playlist on the channel. Without further ado, let's dive into this episode of Switch City and let's get into it. So like I mentioned, we're going to be talking about the Milwaukee Bucks, a team that has a lot of uncertainty and questions revolving around their off season. If we want to look at their final record last year, finished 5th in the Eastern Conference, which relatively was a pretty good season for the Bucks, finishing in at 46-34. But ultimately, in my opinion, they should have been better than what they were. And they made some trades throughout the season that definitely made them look a little bit worse in the playoffs. And it's what ultimately costed the Bucks to lose in the first round, alongside the Bucks losing one of their key stars throughout the series in Damian Lillard with a torn Achilles injury, similar to the one that Jason Tatum got during the New York Knicks series. This leaves the Bucks, once again, with some even bigger questions going into the offseason as we look at their offseason sheet courtesy of Bobby Marks and ESPN, as they are under the tax threshold at $167 million, with an abundance of free agents to be able to rework their roster with no flexibility, no first round pick in this season or in the future, with a lot of guys on non-guaranteed deals or player options. Most of these guys will most likely be returning to the Milwaukee Bucks for their fact that they won't be able to really fill in as many roles as they would like to add. Obviously, like I mentioned, another key, really crippling part for this is the Damian Lillard injury. We're not going to go over that as much in the video, but I would just like to preface that Damian Lillard, I believe, has 2 more years left on his contract, so he'll have 1 more year this season. And then following this season, he'll have 1 more season after that, in which he could either be waived by the Milwaukee Bucks, or they could look to trade him, or potentially look to rebound and bounce back with him and Giannis Antetokounmpo with a new tooled roster around those guys. Once again, I feel like for the Milwaukee Bucks, this should be the telltale sign for them to kind of strip it down, for them to hit that reset button. But ultimately, with Giannis Antetokounmpo being only 30 years old and still being in the prime and one of the best players in the NBA, you could argue top 5, you could argue top 3. I definitely think he's in that top 3 conversation across the league with how dominant he can be. Any team is going to be willing to obviously give you the return back to really bolster your team, but ultimately keeping Giannis and being able to rebuild around your star that you once drafted could also be the key for the Bucks. So once again, let's dive in and let's explore their offseason. We already started talking about him, that's why I wanted to continue and get on into this, and that's Giannis Antetokounmpo. Once again, the Bucks franchise superstar. They drafted him, I believe, back in 2013, if I wasn't mistaken, and he, gradually grew within this Bucks organization, getting better and better, and until he turned out to be one of the league's best stars. We all know that him and Milwaukee won that championship in 2021, but since that 2021 championship, have failed to reach expectations. In 2022, they were eliminated in the second round of the NBA playoffs in 7 games to the Boston Celtics, and in years 2023, 2024, and in 2025, they have all lost in the first round of the playoffs. In 2023, Giannis got some injuries. The Bucks ultimately did lose and had to make some bigger changes around the edges, moving off guys like Drew Holiday to bring in a guy like Damian Lillard, and they lost to the 8-seeded Heat, who went to the finals that year. The following seasons, they lost to the Indiana Pacers as the 3-6 matchup and as the 4-5 matchup, with the Bucks still dealing with injuries throughout those series, with Giannis dealing and Dame dealing with injuries last postseason, and Damian Lillard obviously dealing with an injury this postseason. Unfortunately for the Milwaukee Bucks, time might be on their side, and once again, trading Giannis Antetokounmpo for an abundance of draft picks and young talent could be the way to really reset this team. But with not owning your first round picks, it becomes very difficult on wanting to tank. And with that being the case, and with Giannis ultimately, I think, wanting to stay in Milwaukee. I think he will not be traded this offseason. I do say that at the moment of us not really knowing what Giannis Antetokounmpo is going to be doing in the offseason, but also all signs are telling me that he will be returning to Milwaukee this offseason, wanting to be, once again, able to bring a championship to Milwaukee and wants to be that standing piece, and they'll want to try to rebuild a team around Giannis Antetokounmpo for the future. Maybe look to offload a contract in Damian Lillard while he's injured, potentially, with him being on a one-year deal. We'll have to keep an eye on that, but definitely expect some key pieces around Giannis this season, if they do retain him, to be missing because they, one, cannot re-sign them, but not only just that, because Giannis is going to need a new shaped roster if the Bucks want to compete in this Eastern Conference. Now, one of their only other players that they can really trade on their roster was one they acquired at the deadline, and that was Kyle Kuzma. The Milwaukee Bucks, to escape their second apron penalties and to drop below that apron to have some more flexibility this offseason, traded away a key piece in Chris Middleton, who obviously had been there for the long haul alongside Giannis and Jrue Holiday. They moved up Jrue Holiday the previous offseason to get Damian Lillard, but the time had come for Chris Middleton, as he wasn't looking like that third star from Milwaukee at the money he was being paid. Kuzma, they ultimately thought would be a better fit, and throughout the regular season had some spurts where he did look pretty solid, but overall was just a disastrous fit for the Milwaukee Bucks once again. He plays that power forward position. You need Giannis to play there, unless you move Giannis to the 5 as a small ball 5 and insert a guy in Kuzma at the power forward position. This is not really going to work for this team, and they'd still need some great solid POA defenders on the wing and some still solid scoring on the from the wing as well, regardless in a shooting guard or a small forward to once again complement a guy in Kyle Kuzma. So I do think there's some difficulty there when you are analyzing how the Bucks can really construct this roster. Clearly a guy in Chris Middleton fit in really well in Washington, and will be looking to pick up his player option, it seems, and stay in Washington for this season to help rebuild them. I think that was a good trade. They also got A.J. Johnson in that deal, who was a nice young prospect. The Bucks ultimately lost that deal and could be still looking to move Kuzma on a tradable contract once again this offseason to get a more flexible piece around their star in Giannis. Now, everyone else on this Milwaukee Bucks team either has a player option, a non-guaranteed option, or is a free agent that we're going to be looking at. So when we dive in and look at these players, Bobby Portis is the first one. He has a player option, and I do think that for Bobby Portis, the best option for him is to decline that and go into free agency, as, once again, even if he loves Milwaukee, even if he loves the city, even if he does love playing there, Giannis Antetokounmpo and Kyle Kuzma both play the power forward position, and he ultimately does play that as well. Can play some small ball 5, but I do think the Bucks have, again, 3 power forwards. Doesn't really make sense. Obviously, you could run Giannis at the small ball 5 and have some of these lineups where it does work, but I do think having, 2 of, your 4 or 5 best players next season playing the same position where your superstar also plays is not the best idea. But if they do pursue a Kyle Kuzma trade, maybe a Bobby Portis comeback is in the works. Once again, it is a player option. Maybe he feels like he's not going to be able to get that much money on the open market. But if I were Bobby Portis, I know I can help some teams as a backup power forward and, a pretty key bench piece. And I think that on the open market, I could also help contribute to some of those teams really get to that mountaintop in either the East or Western Conference. But Bobby could have ties to Milwaukee once again, and if he does, loves the city, wants to be wants to be playing with Giannis Antetokounmpo, then obviously a re-sign is definitely possible. Another one is Pat Connaughton. Pat Connaughton also has a player option, and Pat Connaughton was one of the deals that the Bucks were trying to get off of this previous trade season, were unable to do so because they didn't have the draft capital to attach his contract on. Once again, Pat Connaughton taking that player option will be the smart deal because it will be the most guaranteed money that he can get, but he doesn't really play a vital or valid role for this Bucks team so far, or as of recently, because he hasn't been that consistent shooter, and as a defender has gotten a little bit worse. I do think that the Bucks will look to move off of a contract in Connaughton. I do not think that he is worth the value that he is going to be getting paid on that option, and the Bucks may have to attach some draft capital to get off of that, or a young piece once again alongside Chris Middleton to do so, or the Bucks once again might just be stuck with a Pat Connaughton if they cannot get off the contract and he does pick up that player option with him returning to Milwaukee. And the last player option that we're going to be talking about, one that I don't want to talk about a lot because if you know, you know. But Kevin Porter Jr., not going to go into his background, not going to go if he deserves to be playing in the NBA, but played a pretty solid role for the Milwaukee Bucks. He was sent over to them at the trade deadline in like a late combination of deals. I do not remember off the top of my head what essentially he was traded for at the moment of recording. But Kevin Porter Jr. provided to be a solid, scrappy, a defensive guard to really fit into this Milwaukee Bucks system. He had games where he was able to notch 15 to 20 points and look like a solid scorer as well, and looked like he could be, once again, one of their key pieces on the fringes that can make an impact in a reserve role, doing the dirty work that some of these scorers cannot do. And I do think a guy like Kevin Porter Jr. brought back on that contract does make sense for the Milwaukee Bucks, even if necessarily doesn't deserve to be in the NBA. So with looking at players that they could potentially trade or bring back on player options, we're now going to focus ourselves onto free agency and the draft. Once again, similar to the video yesterday that I did detailing the Detroit Pistons, the Milwaukee Bucks do not have a first-round pick. They essentially could trade for a first-round pick and get a young talent brought in, and I would not be shocked if that's something that this team did do, because they do need that young talent and have traded away those draft picks and young talent in the future. But in my opinion, they don't have any of those contracts. Can't necessarily give them a first-round pick, and that's where it provides the difficulty for a team in Milwaukee here next season. So I don't have any draft prospects to look at them. Let's dive in and let's look at two key free agents for the Bucks this offseason that I think have some question marks revolving around them with Milwaukee. So the first is going to be Brook Lopez. Obviously, the big man had an impressive season a couple years ago where he was in the Defensive Player of the Year race and has also been a great fit alongside Giannis as that stretchable big who can hit those threes, but also as an interior paint defender and rebounder. Lopez really reinvented his game coming over from Brooklyn and from the Lakers into the Milwaukee Bucks, and it's brought him into this new role where he can be vital as a scorer and outside shooter for this team, and I think that presents him a lot of value on the open market. With free agency not having that many big names, and with the Milwaukee Bucks also not really having the money to bring back a guy in Brook Lopez if they have to bring back all these non-guaranteed deals or player options, he does present himself to be the guy out kind of on the outs for Milwaukee, and would be the first domino I do see to kind of fall from this core rotation to really leave in the next steps if that does fall into the case. Once again, there have been rumors of some teams being interested in him, the Lakers, the Warriors, the Rockets, etc. And I do think that teams that value a big, and also a big that has been around the league in multiple stints and in multiple different roles, could be a key piece for a, once again, young rebuilding team that's looking to get on the rise. The Pistons are a team that are interested in a big in Miles Turner, and I think that if their efforts to get Miles Turner were to fail, a good turning point for them could be a guy in Brook Lopez. Even though he isn't obviously the high an impact player as Miles Turner, he can still provide the similar qualities on the offensive and defensive side that Miles Turner can at a veteran price that could be very key for a Detroit Pistons team that needs some good veterans in the locker room to really lead some of these young guys. And then the last guy I want to talk about is Gary Trent Jr. Personally, for Gary Trent Jr., I would like to see him back in Milwaukee. Once again, like I kind of mentioned, Giannis does need these scorers and shooters on the wing, and Trent Jr. can provide himself to be that for this team. One thing that with Gary Trent Jr., though, that is a little bit of a problem is last year he was on a veteran minimums deal, and we all know that a lot of players did get the veteran minimum contract because there wasn't a lot of open money on the market for these teams to really be giving them, with the CBA restrictions really kicking into play and having these contracts really tied up and being untradeable. We didn't really see any of these big-time splashes or even some guys that deserved quality money to be getting what they deserved. And I think Gary Trent Jr. once again proved this season that he's well worth that veteran minimum. Even if he's not worth a $15-20 million contract, he's well worth that $10 to $12 million somewhere in the mid-level exception range as a quality scorer for a team, and that's where the problem with the Milwaukee Bucks really comes in. If I'm them, I would love to sign a guy like Gary Trent Jr. and be able to bring him back because he fits perfectly. But the ultimate conundrum and problem is will they have enough money once again with signing all these other contracts and having to bring back all these other key guys and player options in Kevin Porter Jr., Bobby Portis. They have non-guaranteed deals in Andre Jackson and Chris Livingston. And they also have a player option in Pat Connaughton. I could see this team really reworking this roster once again and trying to add some of those valuable pieces to this core to really reset this team. So once again, that's my breakdown on the Milwaukee Bucks. I want to thank you guys for tuning in and showing your guys' support, and let me know your thoughts on what you ultimately think the Bucks could do. Like I said, I do think they will keep Giannis. I do think they will stick in this path, and I do think that is best for the Bucks fans to keep their cornerstone superstar. If you look across the league and you look at another team over in the West that's kind of doing something similar, in the Phoenix Suns with Devin Booker, it makes sense for them to want to keep their star and to keep winning even if they're not in the best position, and you can't be obviously hypocritical when you look at the Milwaukee Bucks from the other side. So in that stance, I do side with Bucks fans. I do feel for them, and I would not want to trade my core superstar player if I know that we can win around him in the future, and we don't necessarily need all these assets to be able to go and get these players if we feel confident they can come to play with Giannis. So once again, line. Thank you guys so much for tuning into this episode here of this offseason breakdown, looking at the Milwaukee Bucks, going over what I think they could do this offseason. Like I said, if you enjoy the content, let me know your thoughts down below in the comment section. Hit the subscribe button, and I'll catch you guys tomorrow for the next offseason breakdown. We start diving in, looking at the Western Conference teams, looking at their first round eliminations. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Have a great rest of your day, and peace out.